Picture a huge step tower rising above ancient Babylon. Priests climb stairways, visitors stare up from a vast courtyard. Bricks smell of bitumen in the heat. Some say this was the Tower of Babel from the book of Genesis. Historians use another name, Edamananki, House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. Was it a legend or a real building? Here's what solid evidence says. Archaeologists in the early 1900s uncovered the tower's square base, about 90 by 90 meters. Ancient tablets describe 7 levels and give a total height of around 180 feet, though some scholars think it was lower. There were many ziggurats in Mesopotamia, about 25 are known, but this one stood at Babylon, later a UNESCO World Heritage Site in modern-day Iraq. Let's see how such towers were built, what the texts and excavations show, how the Bible story fits, and what modern science says about languages on Earth today. Where the tower idea came from. Real ziggurats, real cities. Long before the Bible story was written down, people in Mesopotamia built stepped temple towers called ziggurats. They made a solid core from sun-dried mud brick, faced the outside with fired brick, and sealed joints with sticky bitumen. Ziggurats were not tombs. They raised a small shrine above the city to mark a god's home and a city's identity. Archaeologists count about 25 of these towers across Sumer, Babylonia, and Assyria. None stands to full height today, but plans and foundations remain. This wider pattern shows that a very tall sacred tower in Babylon fit a long tradition rather than a one-time fantasy. Babylon's ziggurat was remarkable for its size and fame. Its Sumerian name was Edamananki, House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. That title reveals how Babylonians saw it, a link between ground and sky, dedicated to Marduk, the city's chief god. Edamananki stood by the ground-level temple Isagila. Processional roads, gates, and palaces wrapped around the sacred core. When Babylonian kings rebuilt their capital, they boasted of restoring Edamananki and Isagila to honor Marduk and to prove royal strength. Today, the ruins of Babylon are protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a modern reminder that this was a real capital with real sacred buildings. How big was the Babylon Tower? A Babylonian plan known as the Isagila Tablet gives 7 stages, a square base close to 300 by 300 feet, and a total height of around 300 feet. In the early 1900s, Robert Koldewey's team uncovered the square foundation in the heart of Babylon. Their measurements matched the tablet, about 300 feet on each side. Few ancient plans line up this neatly with a dig, so this agreement carries real weight. The same tradition describes broad stairways and gates that tied the ziggurat to the temple precinct and the main processional road. Together, a plan on clay and a foundation in the ground anchor the tower in fact. Context helps us picture that scale. At Ur, the best-preserved ziggurat sits on a footprint around 210 by 150 feet and likely rose over 100 feet when complete. At Chogha-Zambil in Iran, the base is about 335 feet square. The ruin stands about 80 feet today, less than half its original height. Set beside those, a 300-foot square base at Babylon fits known royal projects. The claimed 300-foot height would push the limits of mud brick engineering, but it was not impossible for a well-funded capital with trained crews and careful staging. Why build high on this river plain? 2 reasons fit the setting. First, floods. High platforms protect sacred rooms from seasonal water and silt. Second, symbolism. A shrine raised above every roof shows the god's status and the city's pride. Classical writers echo this. Herodotus describes a walled sacred precinct with a tall tower and a shrine on top. He is not perfect in every detail, but his outline matches what a visitor would see: stacked levels, a top room, and ritual climbing in the city center. Was Edamananki the Tower of Babel? The identification is reasonable and widely used. Babel points to Babylon. A famous stepped tower stood at the city's heart. Later sources show kings restoring it by name. A well-known stele of Nebuchadnezzar II even depicts the king facing a stepped tower with a summit temple and boasts of his rebuilding efforts. That is exactly the kind of royal project a capital would highlight. One last frame is the present. Babylon's ruins lie in Iraq and were placed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2019. Visitors can still trace the processional route, walk past reconstructed lines of brick, and stand near the mound where the ziggurat rose. When people say Tower of Babel, it is fair to picture Edamananki, a tall, staged temple tower built in brick, rising from a planned city we can still map and measure. What evidence says? Tablets, excavations, and a debate about height. When a story is famous, the best test is simple. Line up what we can measure or quote. Begin with the plan on clay. The Isagila tablet is a Babylonian plan text that lists key dimensions for Edamananki: 7 terraces, a square base about 300 by 300 feet, and a total height of about 300 feet. It also mentions stairways and gates that tied the tower to the walled temple precinct. The tablet is a later copy but still a primary local source giving numbers, not a rumor written by outsiders. Next, check the footprint in the ground. In the early 1900s, Robert Koldewey's team mapped major features of Babylon and cut trenches into the tower mound. They exposed a square foundation roughly 300 by 300 feet, the same scale given in the plan. When a text and a trench agree, confidence rises. Whatever time did to the upper stages, the base proves the build was enormous. The footprint is as wide as a modern city block and sits right where the sacred core should be. A Nebuchadnezzar II stele shows a stepped tower with a small shrine on top and includes a building text about restoring Edamananki and Isagila. A standard calculation tied to this tradition estimates about 17 million fired bricks for the Ziggurats restoration. Fired bricks would dress faces, corners, drains, and stairs, while sun-dried bricks would fill the massive core. Either way, the figure fits what the base implies: a civic job on a breathtaking scale. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, describes a sacred enclosure with a high tower and a top shrine in Babylon. He is not exact on every point, but he confirms that a city center stepped tower was known to visitors in his time. His account extends the memory of a great temple tower well beyond local documents. A brief Babylonian note from the Hellenistic age, the ruin of Isagila Chronicle, says Antiochus, a Seleucid crown prince, came to sacrifice on the ruins, stumbled, and angrily ordered the remains destroyed. It is a small story with a big punch, a ritual misstep followed by demolition. Together with reports that Alexander the Great cleared debris, hoping to rebuild before he died, it gives a realistic last chapter for a structure already weakened by neglect and politics. There's a debate about its height. The Babylonian plan says about 300 feet. Some modern engineers and archaeologists prefer lower totals, about 100 to 216 feet, based on the compression limits of mud brick cores and comparisons to other sites. Because the upper stages are gone, no one can measure a final top. The fair range is this: the ancient claim is roughly 300 feet, and cautious models allow roughly 100 to 216 feet. Either way, the tower would dominate the skyline, the festivals, and the city's identity. Myth versus truth: the Bible story and what linguists actually find. Genesis 11 gives a short, striking tale. People share one language. They settle on a plain, make kiln-fired bricks, and build a tower with its top in the heavens at a place called Babel. God confuses their speech and scatters them. The message belongs to theology: pride, limits, and the danger of forgetting. History asks different questions. Was there a real tower at Babylon? Yes, the plan and the foundation say so. Could a visible landmark become the heart of a warning story in a city known across the Near East? That is common in world traditions. A symbol grows from a thing everyone can see. What about language itself? Linguists do not find a single moment when one language split into thousands overnight. Today, there are about 7,159 living languages. They form families: Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan, and many more that branch over millennia as groups move, mix, and change speech step by step. Sound systems shift, grammar drifts, new words rise, old ones fall. The scientific picture is one of slow branching and contact over a long time, rather than a sudden global confusion in the last few thousand years. Babylon drew traders, scribes, soldiers, and envoys. Many languages were heard on its streets. The city's power rested on shared systems: writing, cuneiform, measurement, law, and ritual. These let strangers work together. When drought, warfare, or politics broke networks, communication failed, and cities suffered. The myth captures a real fear: losing understanding. The megastructure shows the opposite lesson: what cooperation can build. That tension explains why the story lasts. It speaks to both the hope and the risk inside every large society. One modern point matters: language loss is real. Researchers estimate roughly 44% of living languages are endangered, often with smaller speaker groups. Without support in schools, media, and local life, many could fall silent within this century. The Babel story urges us to value understanding across tongues. The science urges us to sustain the small languages that carry memory and identity. Both point to the same practical task: keep communication alive. Myth and megastructure meet here. The story teaches, the tower measures. Together, they explain why Babel still summons questions about how humans speak, plan, and live together. Human stories around the tower: building, rebuilding, and the last fall. Numbers are useful. People make them real. Picture crews molding, drying, and firing millions of bricks from river mud. Lines of laborers carry baskets up ramps. Masons tap each course until joints are tight, then spread bitumen on the outer face so rain will not cut the corners. And remember the building text linked to Nebuchadnezzar II, where the restoration needed an estimated 17 million fired bricks? That number forces you to imagine hundreds of kilns, cordons of fuel gatherers, teams moving water, and shifts that do not stop. Now, picture the Great Festival. In the Neo-Babylonian age, New Year rites carried cult statues along the processional way, through the Ishtar Gate and into the sacred precinct. The tower's base, nearly 300 feet on a side, anchored that ceremonial heart. Kings like Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar II stamped their names on bricks and texts to claim that they had restored Isagila and Enemenanke for Marduk. The message was plain: we can organize huge public work, we care for the God's house, and we keep the cities linked to heaven in repair. Archaeology turns imagination into plan. Robert Koldewey's team mapped palace courts, major walls, the Ishtar Gate, and, at the Ziggurat Mound, a square foundation roughly 300 by 300 feet. Plans also traced gates and stairs around the sacred precinct. When modern students overlay those maps on satellite views, the outlines still make sense. The geometry that carried ritual and traffic remains legible, even after ages of damage. Writers and travelers kept the memory alive. Herodotus describes a walled sacred enclosure, a high step tower, and a shrine on top, giving a Greek audience a clear image of Babylon's sacred core. Later accounts say Alexander the Great ordered debris cleared to rebuild the tower. Thousands carried bricks away, but Alexander died before the plan advanced, and civil war halted the work. Even a world conqueror could not restart a brick mountain once time, weather, and politics had done their work. The last blow comes from a spare Babylonian note. The ruin of Isagila Chronicles says Antiochus, a Seleucid crown prince, came to sacrifice on the ruins, stumbled on the rubble, and in anger ordered the remains destroyed. One misstep, one order, centuries of slow decay turned final. After that, wind and heat did the rest. Yet the idea of the tower lived on in scriptures, medieval art, and modern studies. Today, Babylon is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors can walk parts of the processional way, learn how the Ishtar Gate looked, and view the mound where the Ziggurat stood. Put the evidence together: a tablet with numbers, a dig with measurements, inscriptions with royal voices, and a legend becomes a building we can picture in detail. Conclusion: so, myth or real megastructure? The honest answer is both. The myth teaches a lesson about unity, pride, and the risk of losing understanding. The megastructure was a step tower we can frame with hard data. A about 300 by 300 foot base in the center of Babylon confirmed by excavation. An ancient plan with 7 levels and a claimed height of about 300 feet. A city now recognized on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Linguists add one more grounded fact. Humanity speaks about 7,159 living languages today, and roughly 44% are endangered. The result of a long history, not a single moment of confusion. But together, the tower and the tale point to the same human truth. Cities rise when we share tools, writing, measurement, law, and respect, and they falter when we stop listening. That is the lesson Babylon still offers. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Iraq's fascinating history, check out our book, Ancient Iraq, a captivating guide to Mesopotamia from the Sumerians and Akkadians through the Assyrians and Persians to the Romans and the Sassanian Empire. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.